I love games with a good story. The interactivity of the media can really make the connection with the characters much more tactile and increase my investment in a truly gripping story. Alan Wake is one of the earlier attempts at using the medium to tell stories, feeling more like a game than some of its contemporaries like Heavy Rain, while still trying to provide an enthralling mystery horror experience. The game's developed by Remedy, makers of the first two Max Payne games, which are noir masterpieces, as well as 2016's Quantum Break, which is a game so story-driven that they filmed actual television episodes to serve as the cutscenes. They did also make 2019's Control, and while I haven't played it myself, it was nominated for Game of the Year at the Game Awards, so I would assume it is at least somewhat decent. So does Alan Wake measure up to its siblings, or is it the unloved child that no one wanted? Let's talk about it. Since the game is so story-driven, it feels fitting to discuss it first. The game follows Alan Wake, who is a famous author in the same vein as Stephen King. Wake and his wife are taking a little time off, renting a cabin in the woods out in the wilderness of Washington. Things, of course, immediately go wrong as Alan loses his memory, waking up a week later and discovering that his wife is missing, and so is the cabin that they had originally rented. Story is heavily inspired by Twin Peaks in its setting, and also kind of has a bit of a Twilight Zone feel to it as well. There's a lot of mystery involved, and given that Wake himself has no idea what's going on, he is an unreliable narrator. So there is a lot of guessing and mysteries to uncover. As with any good mystery, a lot of threads and red herrings appear throughout to throw you off from the truth, and it is an interesting story that does keep you guessing for most of it. That said, the game doesn't do that great in maintaining its characters through clear storytelling. There were some times where characters said something that to me was revelatory, however to them it seems like they'd known about it for a while. Kind of threw me off. Was I supposed to know this? Did I see this somewhere else? That it just was glossed over or not made too important? So there were times where I felt like I was never really sure what had happened or what was happening, and not because the game was being mysterious, but it wasn't being very clear with some of its storytelling. I would also raise a complaint with the voice acting in this game, specifically Alan. He does all the narrations for the game, and he does them in a very monotone style, which is weird when they're usually played over gameplay, and most of the time the gameplay that he's narrating over is very tense. So it's very jarring, it's a very jarring contradiction, the action in the game versus the voice talking about it.
I could see the car, but there was no sight of the driver.
For me, that really drew me out of the story. It made it difficult for me to care or connect with Alan. I do understand the stylistic choice they were going for, but for me, I think that choice really hurt the overall game presentation. On top of this, the game has an excessive number of collectibles spread throughout each of the various locations that it brings you to. Now, I'm not necessarily opposed to collectibles as a rule. I do think that they are not fitting in a game that is so story-driven. At least for me personally, if I know that there's collectibles in a game, I can't help but fully explore an area. And that's a problem when the area I'm exploring has a monster in it that is chasing me, or in the case at the very beginning of this game, you hear your wife scream and fall into the lake, and rather than want to run to go find her, I found myself saying, well, I should check the other rooms in this house first. There might be a collectible in there. So it really, to me, is counterproductive to the story.
Please! Ah! What are you? Ah! No! Don't! I'm sorry!
Collectibles in this kind of a game are completely opposed to the story and the tension and the urgency that some scenes may try to present, and to me only detract from the overall story narrative experience. They really cut into and pull you out of what's going on and reinforce more that it's just a game and it's not a story that you're watching or interacting with. Because of the narrator's voice style, because of some of the storytelling stumbles, as well as the inclusion of collectibles, I do have to give the story a 3 out of 5. Moving on to the gameplay, the main gameplay loop has Alan fighting humans, usually, who have been overtaken by some sort of darkness or shadow. Before you can damage them with weapons like guns, you must first remove the darkness surrounding them by shining a light on them for a period of time. Alan has a flashlight, and this actually makes it a nice little mechanic because the flashlight has a battery, so you have to balance using the battery of the flashlight, using the ammunition you have, and avoiding the attacks coming from the enemies. Sadly, I played on the default difficulty, and maybe this was my mistake, but the game was way too generous with the resources in the game, so the flashlight batteries and the ammunition. It made combat trivial. This is a shame because the systems designed in this game are actually pretty interesting, and they do have, if done right with the amount of inventory that the user has, really can make it very tense because you would be struggling to dodge enemy attacks. You don't want to necessarily recharge your flashlight with a battery because you only have a few and you may need them later for a stronger enemy. So it may force you to stay in combat a little longer, put yourself in danger. It naturally recharges over time, so allowing that to happen. In addition to this, the dodge mechanic is pretty clunky. There were a lot of times where I thought I dodged an attack and I still got hit, so that also made the combat more frustrating than it needed to be, and more frustrating than tense, unfortunately. It's not tense when you dodge, but you still get hit and things like that. That bothers me, and again, loses the tension that this type of a game is trying to build with its setting and enemies. This really becomes much more of a pain later in the game. After a certain point in the story, not only is it people that Alan Wake is encountering, it's also inanimate objects that are just being thrown at him. And these are almost impossible to dodge, which can just really lead to some frustrating deaths. That said, I gotta give the gameplay credit. I probably played on the wrong difficulty. I would recommend playing on a higher difficulty, so I'm not gonna knock it for the inventory issues and the amount of resources you're given. So I will give the gameplay still a 4 out of 5, just noting that the dodge mechanic, though, definitely needed just a few more iterations. They just needed to give it a little more work. The graphics in this game are one of its strong suits. Honestly, I cannot believe that this game originally came out in 2010 on the Xbox 360. Now, in fairness, I played it on the PC, and that version did come out in 2012, and of course, can be updated with higher res graphics or textures and things like that. I'm not sure that has happened necessarily, but regardless, the game holds up really well. While most of the locations are wooded mountains, they all look pretty good. They're all similar, but they look great. Character models are also solid, again, given the time that they were originally created. They're not going to turn any heads by today's standards, but the game is also not painful to look at for such an old game. Where I really want to give credit, though, is in the game's lighting and shadowing. Especially considering that this game was originally made for the Xbox 360, I was really impressed by the lighting in this game. The shadows, how they swirl around enemies, how your light shoots through the darkness. It's very impressive, and it really added a lot to the experience. As far as the soundtrack goes, it's pretty standard horror theme, a lot of screeching violins, strange breathing and groaning noises in the background as you're wandering through the woods, letting you know that enemies are near and ready to jump out of the next room or behind the next tree. They do what they're there to do. It raises tension, but it's nothing that you haven't experienced before in similar horror games. Given all of this, I still want to give the graphics a 4.5 out of 5. Again, that's looking at it through the lens of when it came out. By today's standards, it's probably more like a 2.5 out of 5. But given when it came out, this is a really impressive piece of graphical tech, I think. At the end of the day, this is actually kind of a weird review for me to do, because objectively, as you've seen in the scores, the game does a lot right. However, my overall experience with the game didn't leave much of an impact. The issues I had with the narration and some of the unclear storytelling, as well as the frustrating dodge mechanics, really did drag down the overall experience for me. There's a lot to like here, with individual pieces doing a lot right, but the full package feels lacking and somehow less than the sum of its parts. Overall, I would give this game a 3.5 out of 5, and for value, given its age, I really couldn't recommend spending more than $10 on this game. It is so old, it goes on sale very often at this point for very steep discounts. You can wait until the next Steam sale or whatever other sale to pick it up on the cheap. So what do you think? Do you guys like Alan Wake? Did it work for you? Did you like the narration? Do let me know in the comments below. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends about it, share these videos. Really appreciate the support I've been getting and would just love to see that continue, would love to see the channel grow. What other games do you want me to look at? Also let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys with the next video.